Hello and welcome to the Sisters for Fitness Wellness Show. I'm Stephanie Gaines-Bryant. Our guest today is Colleen Creighton. She's with the American Association of Suicidology. Welcome.
Thank you.
Today we're going to talk about a subject that's pretty tragic, something that's happening here in the U.S. at numbers that are just absolutely incredible. So we're talking about suicide today. Tell us exactly what your organization does.
So my organization, we commonly call it AAS. They're a 50-year-old organization dealing with suicidology. So what that is, it's everything related to the issue of suicide. So we deal with suicide prevention, we deal with the academic research side, we deal with the clinician side, so all the therapists or people seeing patients day to day. But we also deal with those that have suffered a loss from suicide and those that have attempted suicide themselves.
Suicide affects every aspect of life. We've got people coming home from Afghanistan and Iraq who commit suicide at high rates. We've got teenagers committing suicide. You've got elderly people. How do you see things change, or how have you seen things change over the last 50 years with how we deal with this?
Well, I think how we deal with it, one of the things that's hopeful and promising is that people are starting to talk about it more often, which is a good thing. I think for the longest time there was this stigma that if you mentioned suicide, you shouldn't. You should just cover it. You should be embarrassed. You should be ashamed. And that's absolutely opposite from what we should believe. And what you're saying about the ages, we've had kids as young as 8 and 9 years old to, like you were saying, the elderly. So it's really every demographic out there.
So what do you think is the greatest problem nowadays? And let's start with teenagers, for example. There are so many more things confronting teenagers than there were 50 years ago, i.e. social media. So how do you think things have changed in dealing in that arena?
I think there's a lot more pressure, especially maybe in this region too. You kind of see where kids are scheduled every minute of every day. They don't really have that time. They don't have the free time to play outside. They don't have time to just interact and relax with their friends. At the same time, there's that social pressure because every time you turn on your phone, you see a party that you've missed out on, or you feel that your friends are doing something that you weren't. So while we're more connected technological-wise, we're not connected at all with friends like maybe we did in the past. So one of the things the kids are under pressure, they really don't know how to cope. They don't know how to talk to friends. They don't know how to get help when they need it.
Another thing we're seeing, a lot of kids, especially girls, are basing their popularity on how many likes they got on, and they get so emotional about it. It's such a heavy part of their lives that they're choosing not to live because of that? They think it's an acceptable way out, first of all, because they're in so much pressure. They don't know how to cope or how to get help and get the help they need. So I saw one person reference this as kind of like you're inside of a burning building. You know, do you jump outside the burning building? But if you stay inside, that's just as dangerous because in their mind they can't figure out the way out and how to get help. And you are not your likes. You know what I mean? That is that's in coming from the 80s. That is just so. I feel like I'm sometimes on a different planet. I have a teenage daughter, and sometimes I feel like I'm on a different planet with the things that are important to them.
Exactly, especially with the scale of social media too. So it's not just one platform that you're talking about. You're talking about 4 or 5 different platforms that they're on every single day, the text, the chats. So it's really, parents really need to stay involved and start those conversations with their kids every day to really know what's going on in their life.
Now, you just mentioned that kids not having the coping skills that they need to deal with this. Your organization is doing something to help youth. We are, because we realized in many cases it's the second leading cause of suicide around the country. And these are young kids from 10 to 14. So one of the things we said is, how do we need to get involved in this issue? Now in DC, I could sit behind my desk and I could tell you what we think you need to do, but we took a different tact. And what we did is we called local kids and we said, look, we need your opinion. What messaging could we provide to you that's really going to resonate? And so what they did is we called in the kids. We're developing a youth council to advise us on kind of our messaging and what reaches peer-to-peer. And they're going to help and pull that together, and we'll launch it at some point this year. And what are the kids saying?
One of the things they're saying too is a lot of them are afraid. So they know a friend needs help. Number one, maybe they're afraid to go to the counselor because they feel like a tattletale. If I tell on this person, my friend who needs help, are they going to get in trouble? And we're trying to figure out ways to teach them, like, no, if you know your friend's in crisis, you need to get them help. So we're also helping what they can say to one another. So another thing that we realized too is they're afraid to say, hey, are you okay? Do you need any help? You know, are you having thoughts of taking your life? They said, I'm going to give them ideas if I ask them that. And that's the furthest thing from the truth. They might just need that help. And we're realizing a lot of the kids, if one would say, if one person had asked me, are you okay? Do you need anything? I would have taken that next step.
What about bullying? Are you hearing anything about that?
Absolutely. So bullying is huge. And we're finding kids, there was a young girl not too long ago, she was 10 years old, who took her own life based on bullying. One of the things is they don't see any way out. They figure that 100% of the world is against them. They don't really know kind of how to navigate through that. And then when you look at their brains aren't fully developed until early 20s or so. So they really need us to kind of help them through it.
What should parents know?
So parents should be attuned to what your kids are up to. Know some warning signs too. Obviously, some of them are a little bit similar to just being a typical teenager, but kind of know if they're a little more recluse, if they're giving away things and prized possessions. You know, if they're starting to see a little disconnected, if they're not hanging around with the friends that they used to hang around with. Kind of dig in, have that conversation.
A lot of times we as parents are afraid to have that conversation. I guess if you ignore it, then it doesn't exist. And we know as adults that's not true. Absolutely. And
if all the stories that we hear, that parents said, if I had only asked, and they live with that regret, figuring that they could have just had that one last conversation. And again, we said, you're not hurting anything by opening up the dialogue and opening up the conversation at all.
You all also deal with support groups, because it's not just when someone takes his or her own life, you're not just dealing with that person, you're dealing probably with at least 25 other people.
Oh, at least, yeah, because you factor in all of the people that work with them, all the friends in school, all of the teachers and the counselors that deal with them, the extended parents. So we have a whole division for loss survivors, and it's anyone who's been impacted by their friend or loved one that has taken their own life.
And what are these groups like?
They're all different for every community. Some of them realize, it's just parents that have lost a child. That's one way they communicate. Another one is just they need coping skills themselves. Maybe they've had a number of people in their lives. So we have a number of different books, different groups, different readings that they can go through that we've seen. But each one in each community develops its own identity.
And we've seen nowadays, I would say over the last 15 to 20 years, people coming back from war who may have a number of disabilities, may have a number of health issues, and along with that sometimes comes emotional issues.
Absolutely. If you look at the numbers now, they're trending positively, but that doesn't mean we need to stop. It's now about 20 veterans take their own lives each day around the country. And so, that's far too many. But one of the things we realize, we work a lot with Department of Defense, and we work a lot with the Veterans Affairs to really get information to them when they need it. But they're under a different stress, PTSD and all these other skills. A lot of our members are actually centered in Veterans Affairs centers to work with them as they come back and give them the skills they need as well.
How do you deal with you have psychologists and psychiatrists that you deal with? So how are you putting them together with the people?
Well, a lot of them have their own private practice, and some of them are actually in the veteran centers. One of the things we do with them is learn from them too. So every year we have an annual conference, we have all these different working groups. They all combine efforts and talk to one another about lessons learned. So there's even one whole group of all of the clinicians that are loss survivors that have lost one of their patients to suicide. And so they're able to share information, share what worked really well, kind of lessons learned. So a lot of what we do is data sharing between them.
And that's got to have an effect on a clinician, to actually have lost a patient as a result of this. And I guess you tried to do everything you could, but that wasn't enough.
Absolutely. And so from them too, they have all the training going into that, and then to see it impact and how it impacts them gives them a whole other level of, I guess, expectation for moving forward in their careers too.
How about the people who have survived suicide, the people who tried and did not succeed but are on the right track now?
They're such an amazing group. So we have a whole division. We call them attempt survivors, or lived experience is another word for that. And so we learned so much from them. There's a gentleman by the name of Kevin Hines who goes out and talks about he attempted to jump from the Golden Gate Bridge. And so we learned his story. Again, he said, if one person had stopped me that day and said, are you okay? My plan was not to follow through. And there's others. We learned kind of what were the factors that went into your decision. You know, what could we have done a little before that to kind of provide help for you? And we were just at a movie screening last night where there's a project called Live Through This. And if you get a chance, go on the website. It's all these different faces of all these different attempt survivors and their stories. And just seeing, I mean, it's every single demographic, every single age, and it's just, their stories are powerful.
And how are you dealing with the elderly when it comes to that?
So the elderly too, there's a lot of the crisis centers around the country, because one of the things that we do is we accredit crisis centers throughout the country, is they learn that the elderly, it's a loneliness for many of them. And so many of the programs have instituted this caring, like in some of the local centers where they call, you know, or do a buddy check and just check on someone and say, hey, how are you today? Is everything okay? Any concerns? Just to let people know that they're there for them. You know, someone's looking out for you. Someone does care about you. You're not alone.
And that's so true with the elderly. Sometimes all they need is someone to ask them if they're okay. A lot of times family members are not around, you know, and or spouse has passed away and they're alone. And I guess the bottom line of what you're saying about each one of these demographics that we've just discussed, someone saying, someone caring, someone saying, are you okay?
Exactly. I was just going to say it's not just the elderly, it's every single demographic, whether it's the young kids, and whether it's your coworkers, just asking, showing that you care, being present, and having a conversation with them.
Do you think there's been enough outreach to the community when it comes to suicide? I know as an African American in the African American community it's better than what it was, but there's still a taboo associated with suicide.
And there is, and we're still concerned with that stigma, and we're working. I think we're making progress, but I think we definitely have to reach back out and saying you shouldn't be ashamed. Right now, Michael Phelps just came out and talked about his own struggles at that level. So we're working with a lot of musicians, we're working with a lot of kind of idols in many people's eyes to say if they're struggling, you are too, it's okay. Everybody struggles. So we're trying to get that message out, but we have a long way to go before we can get there.
And it seems like such a common story because you think everybody's looking for their 15 minutes of fame. And you think these people, they have money, they have fame, they have success. What in the world could you be unhappy about? And that's the furthest thing from the truth. They have their struggles as well.
Exactly, especially with the musicians. We've seen this past couple of years a lot of high-profile musicians take their own life. One of the problems that we have with that is because it's that double-edged sword a little bit in that there's something called contagion. So after someone in a high-profile visibility like that does take their own life, people tend to maybe look up to them and try to follow. So we deal with a lot of kids around the country that attempted to take their own life after seeing them.
What do you tell them? That's a very interesting thing. Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and especially in schools too. If there's a colleague that takes their own life, there's a contagion. You see other people follow.
A contagion.
Yeah,
okay.
And so one of the things I think they feel is that it's okay. Someone took their own life. What they neglect to understand, and that we try to teach them, is it's not a video game. You can't reset. There's no coming back. You really need to just understand that you need help. We can get you help. And we'll sit down. But it's a huge problem in many communities.
Do you also see with the opioid crisis around the country, have you also seen a spike in suicides? Because not only are you dealing with drug addiction, which it always has some sort of emotional, psychological component to it.
And I think it depends on where. There's pockets around the country where there's different elements and methods for which people choose to take their own life. And so opioids is definitely a factor in some areas, but it's just a general sense of hopelessness because a lot of the attributing factors that go into maybe some drug dependency or drug abuse, the same thing with suicide. Firearms is another issue because I know with the country, 51% of all suicides that take place around the country are due to firearms.
So are you saying that if there were less firearms, if we didn't have, because we do have access to firearms more than any other place in the world, and so that attributes?
It's such a fine line, and it's such a politically charged issue. One of the things that we're working on, there's a lot of groups right now, because we're finalizing our policy statement on that. One of the ones we say is restriction. Just like if you knew your friend was driving and they were drunk and they were ready to get in your car, you would take their keys. And so our concern is if you know someone needs help, if someone's going through a crisis or is in a troubled time, take the danger away from them. So remove the gun from the house. Remove any kind of dangerous element. So that right now is where we're looking. And then because once you get into the other, it
complicates.
Yeah, it's another political whole debate that goes back and forth. So for right now, we said the easiest thing you can do, if you would care for your loved one in a car that's driving drunk, you would take care of them. Same thing with firearms.
You were talking about demographics and the fact that in different pockets of the country, people tend to commit suicide in different ways. For example, because I tend to think of overdoses when I think of suicide, tend to think of firearms. And for example, if you're living in the Northeast, is it because of economics that you might decide, because that hopelessness you're feeling, but someone from the Northeast may be more likely to use pills, someone in the Midwest may be more likely to turn to guns?
There's a little bit of that, but I don't think we have enough research to really back up the why, just because a lot of it is so transient with people moving from place to place. There's just so many other factors. Lifestyle is one, whether you do have a gun, whether you don't. And then for opioids and things like that, there's so many other factors too, from different ways that people choose to take their own life too. A lot of that is just extremely tragic and trauma too.
Absolutely tragic, absolutely tragic. And let's talk a little bit more about what you were saying with the youth program that you all have and that you all are talking about launching. And you were talking about youth talking to youth. How important is that for your peers?
Absolutely, because you find out just from they copy one another so often, and they want to be liked, like you said, they want their pictures liked by their peers. Peers can communicate most effectively with kids, and we realized through a number of programs that we've done in the past is that, I could tell you something, and you're going to say I'm an adult. They're preaching at me again. One of your peers tells you, you're like, okay, you're more likely to receive that information more positively. So we're giving kids the tools they can ask their friends. If you know your friend's in crisis, here's A, B, and C, what you can do. You can go to the counselor. Here's some words you can use. Here's some resources you can call. Here's the crisis text line. Here's a number you can call. Here's a website you can go to. A lot of them don't have access to that themselves. And so we're working, even with schools, there's a cool program that a group called Go Guardian is doing. And what they do is they provide the software in a lot of the Chromebooks in schools. And they're putting it in the system in some of the schools where they can track words that you're using. So if a student is typing something that would flag, the school administrator gets an alert and says, like, you may want to pay attention to the student.
That is excellent. When we watch commercials nowadays, you see a lot of commercials for prescriptions, and then at the end of the commercial, when they're running through the dangers of the prescription drug, they'll say, may cause suicidal thoughts. And I know people who that's happened to. You think, oh, that's not going to happen to me. This drug is not going to affect me in that way. But that's also something that can affect you.
Absolutely, especially now, the cold and flu season, people are taking a lot more medication across the board. We've been working with a lot of the over-the-counter manufacturers, a lot of the pharma and prescription manufacturers to really figure out, get from them, because they know their products best, so kind of work with them on what do we need to know in our messaging to the consumers. If we get a call, what do we need to tell them? What's going on? And then conversely, also kind of report back to them too and saying, here's what we're hearing from people calling us on what's occurring throughout the country.
And it's just know what you're taking, know what risks you're taking when you put something in your system.
Absolutely, read the label. I can't stress that enough. The companies work very hard to put the information on there. They have to go through a lot of federal restrictions, so read the label, make sure you don't mix medications, make sure that you're using the dosage that you need at that time.
We talked about the effect that children have on children. Parents have more power than we think. We think, oh, they're teenagers, they're not going to listen to me, they're finding their independence. But we have more power and more clout than we think.
Absolutely. And especially, you know your kids well. You know, if something doesn't feel right to you, take the time to ask. Kind of know their friends, know their behaviors, know if something's starting to look a little different than what they used to, they're changing behaviors, ask, you know, and have those tough conversations. Sometimes I know it's uncomfortable to have the conversation, but even in the car or even in passing, even in the morning, just at least check in and make sure they're okay.
One thing that you said is really striking. You were saying that you're seeing kids even at a younger age. You said that someone 8 years old. That's really baffling. 8 years old.
And a lot of times we're wondering how much of that is they're seeing things on TV, they're seeing things on YouTube, they're trying to copy.
Think? Do you think it is?
I think a little bit of both, but I think a little bit of it is scared, especially at such a young age. They really don't know how to react. It's a quick fix. And I don't think at that young age they absolutely realize the implications of what they're doing at all. So, you know, you see something on TV, you can rewind it. You can see something on YouTube, and there's a lot of terrible things on YouTube, especially that some of the YouTube stars are putting out. So we're also working with them to saying, here's what you're putting out there, here's what people are perceiving it as, and they're taking it the wrong way. So we need to work with you, like Logan Paul, the whole YouTube problem that they had a couple weeks ago.
Oh my gosh, my kids were telling me about that. He apologized. But still, I guess a lot of times with things like that, you have to one-up yourself. And that was the ultimate, but was it really?
Yeah, exactly.
That was not funny. That was not good.
And he apologized. He's donated money to charity, and now he's coming back out. He has a brand new video I haven't seen a couple of days ago. So he's back into his typical approach and what he was doing. But a lot of people didn't see the apology. And one of the things we're working with is anyone else thinking of doing that, know the content that you're creating and you're putting out there. It's not funny. If it's for likes or if it's for just a quick joke, there's kids looking up to you.
Let's talk about video games, because in these video games you kill and you get killed, and how can I say this? Death doesn't seem, the realities of death are not real in these games. You don't see the totality of what that is. So you kill and you kill other people and you go eat dinner, come back and play another game. That's not what happens in real life.
Exactly. I think with television too, I think we're desensitizing ourselves across the board.
Yes.
But on the other hand, it's also proved therapeutic, which was interesting. We're partnering with a group called Stack Up. And what they do is for veterans coming back, they realize there's so many gamers around the country that what they're doing is on the back end, they're putting ways for them to communicate, but they're actually putting support lines in. So knowing that kids are playing these games, knowing the veterans are playing these games, they're helping them. They're saying, we know that's where you are, we're going to get you the resources that you need there, which has been great too.
Oh, that is great. That is great. In wrapping up our program, I want to talk one more time about what your organization offers, who you are. You've been in existence 50 years. You've been dealing with suicide, all aspects from research, the demographics. Tell us once more.
Yeah, so a lot of what we do is all of our members are putting out new research, new studies, and all these different avenues. Prevention, so we're putting together the youth programs, getting out there. We have all the clinicians, psychologists. We have a conference coming up here in DC in April. And so we also want to hear what information out there is needed that we're not providing. So as we're pulling all these programs together through our 7 different divisions, we also want to know if there's anything else we can provide. So we welcome any kind of feedback at all at any time.
And we will be putting your information at the end of the program.
Excellent.
So if people need to contact you, we can. And the last question is, where do you think we're going from here?
I hope we're going in the right direction. If you look across the board, numbers have been going up recently. So nearly 45,000 lives are lost each year to suicide. That's 123 a day. And if you break it down, that's just about 1 every 12 minutes. So in an ideal world, I want to be an optimist and say that we're going to start trending down. People are going to realize, I need help. I know how to get help. And we're going to start seeing those numbers go down.
And there's so much available out here as far as treatment goes. You are not alone, whether it's counseling, whether it's a support group, whether it's calling a hotline. There's so much help.
Absolutely. The crisis centers are available. The hotlines are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So definitely give them a call.
And I want to emphasize one thing you said earlier in the program. It's so simple, but it is so helpful. If you just ask, is someone okay?
Exactly. Even if it's a stranger walking through a coffee shop, if you see someone that looks like they may be struggling, if they need a hello, we just need to start talking to one another again.
We do. We absolutely need to start having that conversation. And again, parents should start having more conversations with their children. Don't be afraid of the conversation. Don't be so afraid that the child loses his or her life if you had only opened your mouth and talked or read the signs.
Exactly.
So, you've been watching the Sisters for Fitness Wellness Show. I'm Stephanie Gaines-Bryant, and we've been talking to Colleen Creighton.
Creighton, yeah, close. It works.
That I.
It throws you off, definitely.
Throws me off each time. She's with the American Association of Suicidology. We've been talking about all of the wonderful programs that your organization offers, the research you've been doing. We've been talking about how suicide affects every aspect of life, whether we're dealing with the elderly, whether we're dealing with youth, whether we're dealing with people who are coming back from combat. It touches us all in some sort of way. You probably have a cousin, brother, co-worker, someone you know who's dealing with that. So it's a really, really important issue that's difficult to talk about, but we need to talk about it.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity.
You've been watching the Sisters for Fitness Wellness Show. I'm Stephanie Gaines-Bryant. Have a great day.
That's great. Yeah. No, the more you get into it, the more frightening it is, though. You just realize